Well, the DA leader, John Steenhuisen's visit to Ukraine has met with a degree of criticism. He's on a fact-finding mission in Kyiv for the next couple of days. Steenhuisen says Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not a European problem, but a global problem. But many South Africans are questioning his trip, with some saying the DA's efforts and financial resources are needed right here in South Africa. John Steenhuisen joins me now from Kyiv, where he is on that fact-finding mission. We will turn to the criticism that has reared, that we've seen surfacing in pockets of public commentary, Mr. Steenhuisen, in just a moment. But I just want to get your sense of how you've spent the day today. You are now in Kyiv. You started in Lviv. Just tell me about some of the interactions you've had today and what picture they present of the situation in Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's been a very interesting day today, the drive through from Lviv to Kyiv, and it starts to bring home the fact that there is a conventional war underway here when you see the blown up tanks, the buildings, residential buildings that have been destroyed, and you interact with people who've lost loved ones and the like. It very brings home the fact that there's a real war underway here. Obviously, Kyiv is on high alert. There are fortifications all over the city. They are prepared for further attacks, and obviously the missiles and artillery shells that make their way into key infrastructure points here and often miss their targets are now a feature of daily life for people on the ground here. But the people have seemed very resilient. The meetings that we've had, people have been quite determined to defend their homeland and defend their culture and their language, and are not willing to be subjugated. And I think that that determination is what I think kept them going for the time. At some meetings yesterday in Lviv with the governor and the mayor, we're scheduled to meet with senior leaders here in Kyiv, and as well as visit some other locations in and around Kyiv in the course of the next few days to assess the impact, and also meeting with people to discuss the broader impact of this war on the geopolitical situation, to which Africa and South Africa, unfortunately, is not going to be immune.
Yeah. So what is the overall objective? Is it merely fact-finding and to inform yourself, or is there something that you hope will make an impact in how that situation plays itself out in Ukraine? And also, importantly, what do you hope South Africa reaps out of your being better informed about the situation?
Well, I always fundamentally believe that you've always got to go and see the situation for yourself. And it doesn't matter if it was the July riots last year, where I went to go and see for myself the water crisis, as well as the floods in KZN a fortnight ago. You go and see for yourself, because that allows you to make a more informed decision and a more informed perspective. But for me, the very key impact here is to be able to understand what the long-term impact for South Africa, particularly around issues of food security and food prices. And I've been driving this issue quite hard in South Africa around the rising cost of living and the rising cost of foods, basic foodstuffs. And this conflict in this region is going to have an incredible effect on the food security of Africa and South Africa. 1 out of every 3 slices of bread consumed in the Middle East and Africa comes from wheat in the Ukraine. And if this blockage of the port of Odessa continues, it means that fertilizer, grains and oils are not going to be able to make their way to Africa and South Africa. And we're going to see a rise in fuel prices. We've already seen food and fuel prices. We've already seen the effect at the pumps, and we're going to see even more now with basic foodstuffs. Many farmers are very concerned. The price of fertilizer has risen 300% in the last while, mainly as a result of the geopolitical consequences of this conflict here. So we need to understand how we can try and address the situation and prepare ourselves as a country for it. But also, how do we apply the correct pressure to be able to ensure that ports like Odessa are able to be opened up again, so those goods can leave the port and assist our continent and our country in terms of being able to feed our people?
taking you at your word then that you believe in going to quote-unquote see for yourself and quote-unquote so that you can form a more informed perspective. It's not unreasonable to expect that your next stop will be Moscow, is it?
Well, the last time I checked, there was no conflict in Russia. The conflict is taking place on the ground here in Ukraine, and that's why I'm here. If there was a conflict in Moscow, I absolutely would make my way there, but there is no conflict there. The war is being waged here on the Ukrainian territory, and this is where we'll be able to witness firsthand
but Mr. Steenhuisen,
what is taking place.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I accept it. But you and I know that in this conflict, there are two sides to the conflict. Ukraine is not at war with itself. So are you going to get other perspective?
But what is the point of going to a country where there is no conflict? There's no conflict taking place in the Russian Federation.
Just said
we know
to form a more informed perspective.
We know full well what their perspective is. They've made it very, very clear.
How do you know? How do you know when you've not engaged with them?
Well, I would engage with them if there was a conflict in their territory. There's no conflict in their territory. The conflict is taking place right outside the door here. And in the Donbass region and in Mariupol. It's not taking place in Moscow or any of those places.
Are you not interested, I'm sorry, Mr. Not to belabor this point, are you not interested to sit with whichever official at the Kremlin is availed to you, to look them in the eye and say to them, why are you bombing Ukraine? Is that not something you'd be interested in?
Of course I'd be willing to sit, but they've made it very clear why they're bombing Ukraine and why they're doing what they're doing. My interest here is to establish how South Africa is going to be able to mitigate against this and what the pathway to peace would be so that we can end this conflict as quickly as possible, so that we can avoid the disastrous consequences that are going to follow for Africa and for South Africa. We're not going to be able to have fertilizer to plant our own food, and we're going to be cut off from key imports that are required for the basic foodstuffs to feed South Africans. Those are the issues that I'm concerned with. And so it should be in all of our interest that the conflict comes to an end as quickly as possible, and that we try and get parties to the negotiating table on an equal footing so that we can end the conflict. And that should be the priority of countries around the world.
Is the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, among the people that you are seeking audience with? And if so...
Well, obviously, for security reasons, I'm not able to indicate who I will be meeting with, but I will give a full report back once those meetings have taken place. But I will be meeting with senior leaders here in Ukraine, including regional leaders, members of parliament, chairpersons of portfolio committees, as well as ordinary Ukrainians on the ground and civil society and members of the media.
Sure. And just back now to that issue where I was saying that there have been some who've been questioning your trip, saying that your efforts and your financial resources are needed right here in South Africa more. Some even saying that, you don't really direct foreign policy because you are not in government. Just respond to some of that criticism.
Well, firstly, I would say that I'm not in government, but I am a constitutional office bearer. As the leader of the opposition, it's my duty to be able to establish facts so that when I can argue in Parliament or raise points and criticize government or offer constructive suggestions to government, that I am able to do so from the most informed position possible. Also, I think the criticism that's being made is immature. If one looks back at my diary over the course of the last 3 months, I've been wherever there's been a crisis in South Africa. I visited 2 weeks ago the floods in Durban and visited and distributed food aid and water in Tongaat and Ananda, and visited the sites where the most damage was done. The week before that, I was down the south coast dealing with the water crisis in Ugu. Just last week, I was in the Eastern Cape dealing with the crisis of poverty in rural areas and visiting towns like Butterworth that are falling apart. So people tend to think that politics is one-dimensional. It's not. You can be very concerned about domestic issues, but at the same time can be very concerned about international issues, particularly when those international issues have an impact directly on the very issues that you're driving in the domestic agenda, things like the cost of living, things like food security, things like making sure poor people have access to basic basic foodstuffs. So I think people must refrain from thinking about these things in a one-dimensional manner. It's not doing either or, it's doing and. You can focus on international events and domestic events and various other events. It doesn't mean because you're spending a few days dealing with one issue, it means that you've forgotten about all the others. In the interconnected world that we live in today, what happens on the other side of the world has an impact in our own backyard.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that already starting to take shape. And my fear is we're heading into a winter of discontent in South Africa that's driven by high unemployment and driven by poverty and driven by hunger. And we need to understand how we can prevent that.
Right. Mr. Steenhuisen, I've got to thank you for your time this evening. That's the DA leader of the opposition, John Steenhuisen, joining us there from Kyiv, where he's on a fact-finding mission in Ukraine.